All right, well, I think we can jump into it, and then if others join in the meanwhile, they can join the conversation. So welcome everybody, my name is Arpi, and I will be the moderator of today's event. I am representing Apex Lab. We are a software development agency, and we are heavily involved in the energy industry. The reason we have created this community is basically to bring a more pragmatic approach to enhancing smart grid technology. We would like to do that by showcasing real life projects that are contributing to this goal. And of course, another reason we wanted to bring this community to life is to bring professionals together who believe the use of renewable energy and smart grids is a must for a sustainable future. My guest today is James Kitching. He is the Innovation Trials Manager at Myenergi, and he will be talking about a project run by Myenergi regarding demand-side response, which is definitely a unique project. We also know because Apex Lab contributed to the software side of the project itself. I would like to ask everybody to keep your questions until the end of the session, so please remain muted throughout the conversation. We will have 15 minutes at the end to ask your questions. Before we deep dive into the topic itself, I would like to ask you, James, to tell a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in the energy industry? What was kind of the main motivation for you? And what exactly the Innovation Trials Manager role entails?
Yeah, cool. So hi, everyone. I'm James. I've been with Myenergi for just under 2 years now. Prior to that, I've got quite a varied background, which is not necessarily always related to the energy industry. I started early on in my career in telecommunications installs and project management. I've worked in oil and gas on security systems, so full end-to-end systems, working with EPCs, and that again links to software and hardware delivery. I've worked in offshore wind for a short period of time as an operation and maintenance engineer. In terms of Myenergi, I'm local to the Grimsby area, so I've always had a visibility of Myenergi in the area. And I think while not necessarily working in the energy industry, I've always had some kind of link, whether that's through oil and gas or renewables or even telecommunications in a broader sense. And sort of when the opportunity came to work with Myenergi and looking at sort of the innovations and the way they're sort of spearheading the industry, it was sort of a really exciting opportunity for me. Like I said, the rest is history at that point. But also the role that they advertised at the time, I felt really suited my skill set. So primarily, I've studied in electrical engineering, so I've got my degree in that. I've done project management, I've done some hands-on install, and I've always found that I'm best suited for a balance where I can do some of the project management side while also understanding the product and getting hands-on. And obviously, it's something very interesting about innovation and forward-looking companies and future technologies. So I found that quite interesting. Regarding my role in Myenergi, so effectively being the Innovation Trials Manager, it's looking at sort of new technologies or that could be technologies, features, hardware, functions, and looking at ways of how we deploy them. And that might not always be the end goal, being an end product or something we release, but sort of to maximize our learnings and how we can make this unique to Myenergi's vision, I suppose, as well. Obviously, the big one being the demand-side response trial, which we have, I believe Myenergi have sort of, for a better way, dipped their toe into this area before with some small ring fence trials. But this is sort of the first large domestic UK trial that had media focus on it. So yeah,
makes sense. Well, you mentioned Myenergi's vision, so it would be nice to kind of understand the company before we jump into the details of the trial itself. Yep. A bit about Myenergi and that vision you mentioned, if you can describe that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so obviously Myenergi as a company, we manufacture like a range of products that are primarily designed around maximizing customers' self-consumption, taking advantage of generation that customers may have, whether that's turbines or solar PV technology, really sort of making customers energy independent, but that's where there's a bit of a flip at the moment with the way that the industry is going, and we're seeing these emergence of like new technologies, and they're quite prevalent. And we also have to be very conscious that someone, for example, may have our Zappi EV charger on their wall, but not necessarily have a source of generation, and may have no intention of getting that. So the vision as well is about how we, one, have a whole ecosystem, where devices can talk to each other and can be optimized, and customers get maximum value from self-generation. But at the same time, customers who don't have that can also gain value from additive features. Again, demand side response being one of these, and other features that may emerge like in the market. We like to think we're trying to keep at the forefront of that and always keep that customer need and want and added value sort of as part of the vision. But the overall actually thing is sort of the whole home energy ecosystem, like energy management. I think for anyone that's based in the UK, over the past year, we've been through sort of the energy crisis, a cost of living crisis, consumers becoming more aware and conscious. Like I like to use mum and dad as an example. Before all of this, they had no idea what a kilowatt or a kilowatt hour was. And we've seen a massive shift in consumer understanding of power. It used to be, sort of batted around. We didn't really probably appreciate what we had at the time. And now there's a greater understanding, and people are more conscious about the energy they're using.
Makes sense. I think it's not just the UK, but pretty much all over Europe, definitely, but I think all over the world at the moment. So you talked a little bit about demand side response, what is kind of the need, but I would like to understand a little bit more about the trial itself. So where did the idea come from? How did you come to the conclusion that it would be a great idea? What was kind of the need from your side and the consumer side as well?
Yeah, so obviously going back to what I previously said around, we've obviously like explored this before, but on a much smaller scale. And then obviously around last November, National Grid launched what they call the Demand Flexibility Service, which was designed around sort of shifting load from peak times, so typically between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. To try and show that like domestic, not devices, because there was some manual turn down as well that was delivered as part of this, that this can all contribute to help balancing the grid, as opposed to sort of making that shift away from expensive fuels, effectively fossil fuels, because a power station costs a lot, one, to put into standby. It can take time, and show that consumers are willing to help balance the grid, as opposed to this being sort of, it's not in a sense a new technology, because it's always been done in a commercial setting. And obviously when National Grid sort of made this announcement that they was going to sort of spin up this service, it gained a lot of media attention. That's not why we entered it, but it also shed light in an area that had often been kept in the dark. And again, with consumers understanding the needs to do their part. So again, obviously from Myenergi's point of view, we looked at this as a great opportunity to sort of learn, understand from a consumer point of view, like how we can enter this trial, but also do it differently from maybe the norm, which I'll get onto like sort of further down the line. But yeah, that was kind of it. It was National Grid effectively launching a service. We would obviously trialed this before, and yeah, obviously we wanted to be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, I think this would be a great time to actually deep dive into the project itself. So if you can tell us a little bit about the execution and how did the trial exactly look like? What was kind of your aim with the whole thing?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, in terms of who was involved, obviously yourselves at Apex had a heavy involvement, and that was obviously down to the API, which we did have an existing API, but in light of sort of taking a step back and then sort of saying, like, what do we want to get out of this? Like long-term learnings, we needed to rethink that and about how the API functions and sort of the functionality we allow behind that. Obviously from Myenergi side, there was a lot of internal stakeholders. So yeah, so it was a sort of a group effort from strategy, marketing, tech support. It was a real kind of group effort to get this over the line. And obviously public knowledge anyway, but we obviously partnered up with an aggregator. So the aggregator was responsible for sort of deploying those devices. Devices are obviously in the field, but the actual shift in demand, we used an aggregator for that service. Our kind of aims for it was more of a technical validation and also behavioral learnings, I'd say. You know, not trying to push the customer to plug in. So obviously the idea is all about shaving peak demand. What we didn't want to do was encourage customers to plug in, to like be rewarded or however some other consumers did it. We wanted to offer this as a fully discrete service. And obviously the outcome of that was, if we can prove that this is like a long-term, discrete, sustainable service, it proves longevity. And I think as opposed, so I'm going to go my personal opinion at this point, and this is purely because I entered the demand flexibility service with various aggregators. So I did some intelligent shifting with devices, and I did some manual turn down, you know, switching lights off, that kind of thing. Well, I do think there is a place in the market for manual response. My view on it, which was, I've got a young family at home, peak time in my house is typically between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. You try and tell a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old that they can't watch the telly or do these things, like it's not sustainable, I'd say. And the reward that I gained from shifting my manual usage was kind of negligible. So from our point of view, and again, we know not everybody's got these technologies in their houses, and part of Myenergi's mission statement is like remove the barriers to a greener future. You know, and it's again that whole like, if someone's just got a Zappy, how can we add value? If they've got the whole system, how can we add value? So
makes sense. When you talk about devices, what do we mean exactly? So what kind of devices were part of the trial?
So it's specifically for this part of the trial, we focus primarily on our EV charger, Zappy, which comes with its own challenges. Obviously, it drives away, EVs drive away. So we were trying to sort of gauge an understanding of like a consumer behavior of how many people are on time of use tariffs, because primarily they'll set to charge overnight, as opposed to people who come home and just plug in and fast charge. So, you know, charge and forget. So yeah, primarily for this trial, it was solely around Zappy. So to talk a bit about the products, obviously we've got Zappy, which is the EV charger, which can be used to charge from the grid or use excess PV generation. We have the Eddy, which is a solar diverter. So that can be used to divert excess solar to underfloor heating or hot water tanks. And then we've recently launched Libby. I should know I was involved with it, which is our home battery solution as well. And obviously, when we talk a bit further, you know, if you start thinking about the whole ecosystem and the amount of flexibility that one property can provide and the value that a customer would get from that, is sort of like, it's an exciting prospect. Correct phrasing.
Nice. And so basically the trial was focusing on Zappy. And in terms of the consumer engagement, so how did you kind of, how involved were the consumers in the process itself? How did you kind of choose what kind of people to do the trial on, or how was that kind of decided or put together?
So we looked at a number of options in terms of like recruitment drive. We did a specific sort of in-app notification where customers could onboard that way. We did a bit of a social media campaign, which pointed consumers down the route of a landing page, which gave a bit more information on the trial. Again, probably going back to something I've previously said, we really wanted to offer this as a discrete service, because if you think about it, going back to like manual fatigue or interaction or something that you have to do continually, some people will just naturally start to do that. But a lot of people, as we make that shift from early adopters to mass market, was fit and forget. And the way we obviously went around that was like minimal customer interaction. We did give customers the ability to override for 24 hours, but we kind of kept it to a minimum in terms of letting customers know ahead of an event, or if that event was going to happen. And what we actually found from that was that we had pretty much zero complaints. That you know,
so that's more like a seamless kind of interaction with the consumer.
And you know, looking at how we did it, and if you go down the route of like incentivizing these things, the way I always think is if I opted into these services, or it was delivered sort of as an out of the box solution, it'd be nice to know that your car was charged, your battery's been charged, everything continues to operate, but the next day you've been incentivized in some way. And I have said this to you before, RP, as well, like, you wake up and you've got a voucher for a coffee, or you can make charitable donations or credit off an account or whatever that looks like. But as a consumer, it's not put you out in any way. And on another point, some of these technologies can be quite expensive. And if that's the proposition you go with, it does reduce the return on investment of these devices, as well as using self-consumption if you've got solar or wind. But if you're solely using this device to grid charge, but you're ultimately, one, helping balance the grid, but two, from a consumer's point of view, which at the current climate is probably more financially driven, gets rewarded for that, you're naturally bringing down that payback time. So
yeah.
I think
it makes sense.
It's great, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. And so I'm guessing there has been other trials similar to this one before. So I'm trying to kind of grasp what does your approach really makes the whole trial unique.
My personal or Myenergi in a sense.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So some of the earlier Myenergi trials, which before my time, were collaborative, like innovation type. More obviously they're always learning the trials, but on a much smaller scale. And again, some of the learnings from that probably filtered down into this again, which is the whole: can we offer this as a discrete service without imposing on customers or consumers, or waking up in their devices and charge? So as a quick example, obviously it's about peak shifting. So charging from the grid, if you're on single phase, a Zappi will charge at roughly 7.4 kilowatt. We took the decision that we never wanted to stop that device. So what actually happens during an event is a command is sent, and it actually reduces that Zappi down to its minimum sort of allocated power, which is 1.4 kilowatt. So although the customer or the consumer power has been reduced, we never stop that. And obviously these events only spanned over sort of the course of 1 hour. And again, the customer always had the option to go into the app and override. And that, in terms of engagement, going back to that as well, we did obviously make customers aware you always have the power. If you've got a long journey in the morning, just be conscious to press the button within your app.
Fair enough. Absolutely. We had a short mention of the national grid. I'd be curious, obviously they must have been involved, or you probably reached out to the national grid or any kind of energy provider. So how should I imagine, did you receive any kind of feedback or support from them?
Yeah, so national grid. So this team is larger than me. Let's put that into context. Yeah, they were really engaging throughout the trial, more so on a consultation side. And like obviously out the back of this, some of our team have been involved in consultations, sort of learnings. How can we make the service more accessible? Because again, this has always been a more commercial product service offering. So industry, so probably smaller domestic asset providers, have been given the opportunity to collaborate with National Grid, and obviously help hopefully define in the future how to make it easier for these assets to be part of the system. And that's continually ongoing, and I have seen some of the outputs of that, and some of our input and other providers' inputs has actually been taken into account, been factored into services going forward. So I think it was handled well on their half. There was a few bumps along the way. Obviously, it was a smooth process, and the speed at which they launched the service was definitely. We'd have liked more time, if that's a polite way to sort of say it. But yeah, no. And it's a credit to like your team, Myenergi's team, and I think everybody across industry who entered this service, and the speed at which they were able to do this is commendable.
Very nice. Well, we talked about all the exciting aspects of the trial itself. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about the results. Did you consider the trial a success? Can you share some data about this? Yeah.
So across the time frame for the trial with National Grid was from November to March, and over the course of that, we responded to 12 test events and 2 live events. So 2 live events, that's the call to action that we will not fire up power plants and we'll use the asset pool to offset that peak demand. Obviously, we had around 1,700 customers opted in, which actually gave us accessibility to around 2,000 devices, which doesn't sound a lot, but for the way we went around this service, it was an impressive number. That actually gave us around 13 megawatts of flexible load. I mean, even if you say 2,000 devices at that level is quite impressive. Over the course of the 14 events, we shifted around 2 megawatt. And again, talking for the numbers, which was, I mean, roughly, I think we had around 400 participants across the 14 trials. And again, we wasn't actively asking customers to plug in and respond to this. We wanted to see a natural behavior. So yeah, we personally, and I think from my energy point of view, for a proof of concept, it's great. And we take the learnings and see how we scale this. And then, I mean, if you look at the bigger picture, I mean, we have around 120,000 Zappies in the UK. I mean, that alone gives us around 800 megawatt, which you're talking power plant size anyway. And then if you look at our recent statistic that we've got like 500,000 devices shipped, if these devices are all connected and offering a service, we're talking gigawatts of energy. Now that's 3.5 gigawatt. If you're talking a reduction of sort of 6.5 kilowatt for every Zappy, let's say, you're talking 3.5 gigawatt. We're talking on par nearly with the biggest power plant in the UK, which is Drax.
Very impressive. So I'm assuming this is considered to be a big success in terms of the trial itself.
So small scale, definitely. Like, and it's a proof of concept that it's now looking at how we market this or deploy this and put the proposition behind it that can sustain the growth. And again, like as a consumer and a fan, I see real value in this. And if you can get that right and that balance of the out of the box, this service is enabled and customers have the choice to opt out, but you can make that reward sort of so like appetizing that they want to remain in. I think you'll strike a real balance. And I mean, the key thing here to say is like with a power plant, you've got a sort of warming up time, the standby charges are astronomical, the deployment isn't fast. These devices can be used as one total aggregated pool, effectively a power plant, but also these devices can be split into smaller aggregated pools. So you can actually respond on a regional level or even like at a neighborhood level to demand side response. And these devices are in quick reserve. So like the response time is under 1 minute. So if there is sort of a need at speed, sorry for the rest of the rhyme there, but these devices like far outweigh the need to fire up a power plant in my eyes. And I think that's proven, again, not just from our trial, but the actual, I think overall, National Grid said they shifted around over 3,000 megawatt hours during the events. Like that's huge. It's a huge number. And I know some other providers have rallied for actual just, we shouldn't rely on fossil fuels. Like we proved it over the winter that this is a valid technology and that we can, we should lead into it more.
Very exciting. And in terms of, let's talk a little bit about the challenges. So what was kind of the main challenge that you faced throughout the trial? Was there any?
Hard one, that. Yeah, I mean, going back to that whole like the speed at which we had to enter the service to kind of design our proposition and put our thoughts into place of how we want this to look and what we want to learn from it. But again, as a collaborative effort, and working with an aggregator and working with you guys, again, sort of big up Apex, you shared the same kind of vision. There was never kind of any butting heads. It was always like a combined effort to get to where we needed to be. And again, it's a testament to that. We all share a passion for this technology. And it's as opposed to kind of butting heads on it, but having more collaborative talks and collaboration within the industry. And again, even us doing this, and as opposed to some big utility providers, my sense is like we should be working combined. And National Grid have done a good job of that by hosting the consultations and things like that. But yeah, I mean, other challenges is just like how we scale this now, what we do with the learnings. I mean, we've got some real good, obviously, findings in terms of delivery, and the fact that we know, so like, again, practically zero kickback from anything we did.
That's very nice.
And again, it's like an upcoming challenge is how do we bring out other products into this? So again, I mentioned Libby is launched recently. That's an asset that obviously, like the Zappy, the power can be increased or decreased, but also has the ability to export back to the grid. So that becomes an interesting proposition. And what I find really good is how a consumer thinks about that. Like, how would I feel if I woke up and my battery had discharged and my EV wasn't charged? So it's finding that perfect balance that, again, it's a seamless technology, but financially a customer's rewarded, the grid's been balanced, you know, and the quick reserves there, and it scales. So yeah, it's
very exciting. Well, you mentioned, and obviously this has been a success, so I'm assuming you have some future plans for this demand side response. So what are kind of those plans? If you can share some insights into the future, what are your plans with the product?
I mean, obviously, again, it's looking at probably our other products and how we offer these as a whole. Like, it's again, instead of looking at each device individually, it's like how we call it the ecosystem, how the ecosystem can become a consumer's virtual power plant, and how we deliver that. Obviously, there's a host of services which are like publicly available that we obviously would like to investigate. But I mean, for us, I think really it's nailing that scalability and propositionally how we differentiate ourselves with the consumer in mind. You know, and again, it's going nearly full circle back to that at the start. It's we want, you buy this device, and when you buy these devices, the first thing in your head isn't, how am I going to trade? How does this device interact with the grid? Like, how do I trade with the grid? It's, does it charge my car? Does it suit my needs? Does it look nice? Or, you know, does it serve a purpose? This is almost like a added value that you just get with it out of the box. You know, we really want to push that we offer this service as an out of the box solution. And in terms of, again, other trials, watch this space, I suppose, is all I can say at the minute. Just keep everyone on tender hooks about what we're working on. But no, but just, I mean, to say we're actively engaged in the space. I mean, you guys know it from working with you. Myenergi have got a real passion.
Absolutely.
Again, I don't know if I mentioned this, like the first Zappy, the first product we ever launched, which is Eddy, was designed around demand side response. Obviously, there's other factors, but a huge influence. And this was back in 2016, 2017. Lee and the guys who were all involved in it were already thinking to the future. And this is when demand side response wasn't as sort of thrust into the mainstream media. So like some underlying information there is like that, back to the vision again and everything. It's how these devices kind of talk and help consumers while also balance the grid as well. So it's, yeah, and from my personal point of view, it's just super exciting, like working with a team who are passionate about it, outsourcers who are, you know, again, super passionate about this work. It's great. Nice.
And so you mentioned the team a couple of times. So how many people exactly worked on making this a reality?
Well, if you go way back, I mean, the whole engineering team. So obviously there's firmware improvements. There's the Apex team, again, going back to marketing team, tech support. I mean, I probably couldn't put a number on that. You know, again, there were so many layers to it, and the speed at which everybody delivered on that. Again, like, if anyone on this call is from Myenergi and was part of that, like, just thank you. You made my life a lot easier, but at the same time, yeah, it's that whole collaboration piece, and it made it really an enjoyable project to work on, and hopefully I have the opportunity to keep working on this project and sort of help drive that side of the business, because it really, really is it's a great place to be in.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I'm wondering if you have anything else that you would like to share about the project itself, if there is anything else that comes to mind.
I mean, overall, I think we've probably captured, a lot of the vision, doing that whole consumer insight and like learnings piece and what we wanted to get out of the trial. And like I say, I think if industry keeps pushing and providers keep pushing the way they are, I genuinely do see this as an alternative, and it helps us drive towards net zero. And again, less resilience on sort of fossil fuels, and again, expensive to run. Like, you could reward customers who would be more willing to offer up these devices, or again, even going back to the manual turn down side of things, like there is a place in the market for these people who don't have the technologies. But again, Myenergi want to help remove the barriers and help customers take control a little bit of their energy.
Makes sense. You mentioned the speed a couple of times, so I'm wondering, why was it crucial to get this done as soon as possible?
Because we saw value in this. It's something, obviously, it's something we'd done the smaller trials, I suppose, without knowing that this was coming, was leading to this ultimately. And we saw it as like as a fantastic opportunity to engage with our sort of community, because we are effectively trying to build a community of Myenergi customers, and it's a shared goal that, everyone adopts it, has the ecosystem, and it's that shared vision. It's speed. Again, it's just, I'm trying to think of a way of wording this that's pragmatic. I don't know. This was kind of like the big proof of concept for us, if that's the right way of phrasing it. Again, we've done the smaller trials. We saw real opportunity in this as well. And again, I think the timing, although it's bad for consumers when energy prices have never been higher, it's been a great opportunity to show that what these technologies can offer if people are open to them, and industry is open to them as well. So,
alrighty. Well, I think we covered more or less majority of the things, and I see there some people already have some questions in the chat. So it would be nice to kick off the Q&A session, and I would encourage people to raise hands if they have questions. And I would like to start with David Hawkins, as I see he had 2 questions in there. So David, feel free to ask James your questions now.
Sorry, I just need to unmute myself, do I?
Yes.
Okay, I am unmuted. New technology again. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still typing another question, actually. I was just interested to find out, thank you, James, for the presentation. That's the first thing. You mentioned on the way through, I think, an overall reduction of 2 megawatts. Is that an average reduction of 2 megawatts per event?
No, so that's 2 megawatts overall. So that's across that's the cumulative of the 14 events that we responded to.
Okay, so that is quite small, isn't it?
It is in terms of that, but when you look at our average reduction per consumer that responded, it's 4 times greater than some of the manual participation we saw and some of the other providers' figures. So while small, for us, it's an achievement that we were able to deliver that.
Yeah. So of the 1,700 customers, how many do you think participated in each event on average?
Can you bear with me 1 second?
Oh, sorry.
I don't want to drag this out. I mean, some of this stuff, I think API's going to set up a channel where we can farm some of these questions, because I do have the numbers, maybe just not as quick.
Yeah, I think if you have more specific questions, as Greg already mentioned in the chat, we have a Slack set up, so we can kind of answer more exact or more elaborate questions.
Well, okay, so let's park that one. And what incentive are you offering customers?
So as part of this, we didn't offer an incentive, and at such the small scale that we're operating, it's kind of negligible at that point. And obviously we never directly told consumers that we'd be offering incentives. This was more about reinvesting. Anything sort of coming out of it is reinvesting into the platform. And again, with the numbers I've told you, it's minimal. But what this really does do is set us up, because we now understand more than we did previously, we can now look at how propositionally we differentiate ourselves. You know, because if you was involved in any of this, you'll understand there was a mixture of incentivizations from people through cashback, vouchers, points, rewards, all that kind of thing. So
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, money talks, and that might explain why the response was less
so
than
the,
I'm not criticizing you for it. It's
honestly, you've touched on a really good point there, which is, you know, when we talk about the challenges, obviously with consumer mindset being so financially driven at the moment, it is how do we scale? Well, at that point, we hit the number we wanted to, with like a lot of engaged customers who understand the vision, and, you know, probably a lot of early adopters. Going forward, we do understand consumer motivation and what drives people to enter these services. And we do know if we want to scale, that's something we have to take into account. Going back to the earlier point, is like, before making any rash decisions, we want to make sure we get it right. And the learnings we've got from this will hopefully inform that going forward. So I hope that kind of answers your question in a way.
If I get a chance for a final question, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, totally appreciate what you've said so far. The final question is, what does the load profile look for a collaborating customer? Do they have to reduce from 7.5 down to 1.5 for the duration?
No. So obviously we us as being sort of the service provider, across this portfolio for this trial, we did reduce the maximum, which is down to 1.4. This is actually a really good question. The larger that profile gets, the less we have to shave customers' load profiles down, if that makes sense. The bigger aggregated load, we wouldn't necessarily need every customer to reduce by 6.5 kilowatts. It could be that you could use the same profile to only reduce each customer by a kilowatt, depending on the requirements of the grid at the time.
Oh yeah, no, totally understand that. And I like the idea that you can play tunes with what you've got. But I just wondered, after you've carried out that reduction and the hour is completed, do you get any sort of demand snapback that you see on other occasions, in other instances? For example, after a fault, when everyone sticks everything on all the time. See,
this is again another good point. You kind of saying things that weren't included in this. I had a bit of and please take this as my personal view on this. This is not Myenergi. Like with the manual turn down that a lot of providers promoted heavily, the idea is obviously to reduce demand during peak periods. So for the course of an hour, all I saw that as is they're offsetting that to the following hour, because once everyone's finished turning off from say 4 till 5, everyone's going to turn everything on at 5. You've raised a good point there. We probably need to do a bit more investigative work into, you know, all those devices coming back online. But I mean, you know, there's things like randomized delay which don't play into demand side response necessarily. And I'm going to make a note of what you said. No, because that's really interesting. If we stagger,
I mean,
stagger that tail.
This is my 47th year in the industry, so I'm not saying I've seen it before, but I've seen similar things occur elsewhere.
No, and it popped into my mind. You know, I read a lot of articles about people sitting in the dark and turning off the consumer units. I was like, well, what's going to happen at 6 p.m. is that there is a huge spike in demand. So how do you account for that? And I suppose one way is we do have the ability to stagger that ramp up again. So we could potentially offset that, a bit like how randomized delay works, but on the opposite, like randomized power ramping. So I like that. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks. I'll stop asking questions now because I'm eating up all the time. So otherwise, my demand is exceeding others. So I'll go to mute now. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that, David. I would be curious to hear Royston's question.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Also, thanks, James, for the talk. It was really interesting. So the question I had ties in a little bit with the discussion you've just been having, which is I saw a presentation by OVO at Utility Week Live back in May, where they were talking through their experience of the DFS trials. And I remember specifically their person pointing out that they'd, through some analysis, believed that about 10% of the behavioral change became embedded. So i.e. the customers kept doing it even after the DFS trial ended.
Okay.
I just wondered if you'd seen a similar effect, and obviously that does have implications for the longer term calculations of DFS if customers. Obviously, it's good for the system, but it's not necessarily good for monetizing DFS if customers are embedding behaviors at such a large extent.
Yeah, so there's a whole thing around obviously gamifying this, and to your point there, like how you go around that. And I think this is going back to the part I've probably mentioned, is like why we try to not encourage behavioural changes. You know, if I say we have 1,700 customers as a total, and only over the 14 events we saw around 400 to 500 successfully respond. We weren't actively, and again, if you participate in any of these, you'll probably have had a notification every time there was an event. We truly try to offer this as a discrete service and not change behavior. Like, it's more mindset change than behavioral change, if that makes sense, if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, sort of does. I guess it's just, I think, a challenge for all of us looking at DFS, that if there is significant behavioural change, then the load is no longer there to shift. That's a challenge in itself. So.
Exactly, and it's how you want to do that, whether you take that approach or we let consumers carry on how they do now and not have to make these changes. And again, like, depending on who you signed up with, like if these are EV drivers, we still are in kind of an early move over to mass market adoption. Like, I don't want to keep using the example of my mum and dad, but I use it quite a lot, of like, they just want to go out their business and plug in when they plug in. They probably might ask me about a time of like, how can I charge cheaper and things like that. But if you start thinking like we want people to adopt these technologies, one, for their own benefit, and two, to also help the grid. Like, yeah, it's an interesting debate to be had, I think, around.
I think I would agree with you, James, that the answer is probably automation. The more we can automate it end to end, and potentially, you know, utilizing the PASs and other things, you know, embed those kind of technologies, then it becomes less of a risk because it's all automated anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really close to the industry, I think there's a natural thing that you assume everybody's really like up to speed or like involved with these technologies. But, you know, a lot of people do just fit and forget, you know, and maybe there is a bit of an education piece around the value that these devices can add. And, you know, you need to make consumers aware that, you know, if we took the decision to offer this service out of the box and it's an opt-out service, that they understand what that means for them. Again, challenging how it works in reality. There's probably two arguments to get, or two collaborations to, you know, come to a combined agreement on these things. But now it's yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on it.
Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts.
No, it's great.
Thank you, Royston. Gerald, you had a question as well, if you'd like to ask.
I had a question, and my question was more about the lesson learned from the pilot project in terms of the lesson learned that can be applied for other similar project, innovative projects, maybe in the future.
Yeah, so that's a hard one again because of the speed at which it was deployed. It's from an internal point of view, you know, there is lessons learned, and probably around like, well, it's not lessons learned, it's more of like maybe we an A/B approach, and like, should we have engaged with customers, should we not, to get a maximum learning, like that rounded output that can drive it. But I mean, as a consensus and teams that were involved in this, we kind of said we do want it to be a discrete service, and see, yeah, if you're looking, so some of the questions that have been asked, like longevity, and again, changing customers' mindset, and like, I don't want to change my behavior. Like, I'm a creature of habit, and humans are creatures of habit. We don't react well sometimes to shifts in mindset, or, you know, how we do things, which we want people to do more of, but it's not necessarily something that's going to happen. So, you know, offering this as a discrete long-term service, I think is the solution. Other things we've learned, you know, there's a few internal things around device behavior, and I can go into detail, which I'm not going to. yeah, we've got a whole raft of things that we're going to look at, address, improve on, and sort of build on for the future.
Okay, fine.
Tony, I see you have a couple of questions just raising. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes, so if you can kind of try and ask those questions a bit briefly, but the stage is yours if you'd like to go forward. Tony, are you here with us? Alrighty then.
I mean, if he's sorry, I was going to say, if he's dropped off, if we copy these questions into the Slack channel and we can address them.
Exactly right. So that's probably going to happen. Then the next one is from Andrew Larkins, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Larkins from Sygensis. Thanks very much for, thanks to the people waving. Thanks for a really fascinating presentation, and particularly the consumer insights. My question was about standardization and the sort of move to the BSI energy smart appliance PAS type approach of standardizing interfaces and control mechanisms. Do you think that will really help in terms of ultimately driving mass adoption of this?
I think, so from my opinion, yes, as long as the consumer is always put first and it doesn't have detrimental effects to the consumer. And that's something you always need to keep in your mind. Like so I've always worked on the perimeters of kind of the energy industry, more as a consumer than in it. Now I work within that territory. I think people, there can be a consensus around like not putting the consumer first. There's talk of it, but a lot of it can be self-serving. So I genuinely think if it's done in the correct way, and providers like Myenergi and people who, got all this data, rich data, can make informed decisions about what's best for the consumer, then it's a good thing in my eyes.
Yeah, and just to sort of follow up on that, you mentioned in passing the sort of randomization. What's your view of that? Well,
my view is that it's a good point that got raised on this call, to be honest with you. And I've made a note to explore it. So I can't say that we've actively gone, oh, what happens at the end of that? We've got the front end of that in randomized delay that's built into our products now. But yeah, it's probably a good point, and I'm glad I've had this call to bring something, because again, being the company we are, people miss things, and not saying we've missed it, but this is a great opportunity again. It's that collaboration piece again. Consumers,
if you want to talk more about that, that's an area we've done quite a lot of work for National Grid, so on. So
okay, yeah, that'd be interesting. And to go more in depth in your point, again,
meeting for me whenever I go.
So sorry, there's again, there was a whole team behind this, and more people on the further down the line to your past question, things like that. If you want to dump that in the Slack channel, I can probably get you a bit more of a comprehensive answer on that as well. So
okay, great, thanks. Let's other people ask some questions.
That's fine.
Thank you, Andrew. I see Patrick Brown, you had a question as well, so feel free to ask.
Sure. Thanks. And James, I'll just echo the previous questioners. Thanks for the presentation. I thought it was very good. You may have mentioned this and I might have missed it, but what metric are you using to determine the optimal time of usage? And then are you, based on that, what are you using or do you have any kind of forecasting ability? So can you forecast out like maybe 24 hours and say the best times of usage will be these hours?
I don't know what I can say on that at the moment, to be honest. I don't want to try and shun that off. So in terms of demand side response, that was all provided around baselining. So obviously that was measured against previous forecast and then predicting spike in demand. Our going forward, things like looking at dynamic pricing and things like that obviously factor into when we think optimal timing is, or yeah, we have a lot of data around charging habits and things like that. And obviously at the minute we're looking at the ecosystem as a whole, and I say we're still looking at how we optimize that and say it's an optimal time. I mean, obviously in the UK we've got time of use tariffs and things like that, you know, demand shifting type tariffs as well. So I've probably not answered your question as you want fully again, but if you wanted to put something again in the chat, yeah, it's just, I mean, we have data obviously around the amount of zappies in the field, the usage, it's that kind of thing, but at the same time optimizing that for a customer it's a tricky one, because it's whether you like the customer wants to be in control or we optimize that for them as well. And again, there's two subsets here. There is people who come home, plug in, charge, don't really care about the price or the cost of it, sort of charge and forget. And then there's other customers who are on these time of use tariffs. You know, they get a cheap rate for a period overnight, but usually the day rate is inflated that of the variable tariffs. So, you know, it's something we're conscious of, we're looking at, and probably why we didn't go sort of whole hog on this, because we really want to get this proposition right, that as it scales, it's the correct thing. I mean, we'll always be learning and iterating and innovating, but ultimately, yeah, we do want to make sure we're doing right by the consumer first.
Good. No, that answers the question. The last comment I wanted to make was, I think you were right on target earlier when you said that, you know, you guys were kind of targeting not necessarily changes in behavior, but changes in way of thinking, right? You got to accomplish that first before you can actually change the behaviors, right?
Yeah, that'll come naturally as a progression of the mindset change. Yeah. And again, we look at all these things, and this is why Myenergi is great, because we're looking at the whole picture of like, how do we educate it without sort of forcing it down a consumer's throat as well? Yeah, it's just a natural, people get these technologies and they become a bit more inquisitive, or for people who aren't inquisitive and see it as just a socket or an outlet or a battery that's storing their energy, we give them that education piece, that this is more than just something that self-consumes and helps you be more independent. You're actually doing some good. And selfishly, consumers, all, you know, a majority, again, financially driven, but you're also doing good in supporting the grid and relying less on dirty fuels. And again, it's hard to say because I used to work in oil and gas for a stint, so I've gone from one side to the other, and I prefer this side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I think we have time for one last question. So if anybody has something that they really want to ask James, feel free to either write it on the chat, or there is a reactions button. You can just raise your hand and I can see.
Yeah, and again, like obviously if it's in-depth questions, we can obviously put them in the Slack channel and we can address them, you know,
absolutely
a bit more comprehensively as well. So
exactly right. And I am posting an opportunity. So if you click on the link, you can join the Slack channel right away. So I encourage everybody here in the call to do so. I'm guessing we will take the Q&A to the Slack channel afterwards, and this has concluded our session. Thank you very much, James. I think this was very insightful. I'm wondering, how did you feel? How did you like it?
No, yeah, I just want to say, like, thanks to you guys for hosting this. I mean, me and you spoke a bit, RP, and like, I know other people sort of in the room, you know, it's become from something when I studied electrical engineering, I remember this, and it sticks with me, this, my tutor showing us a map of the grid and the current infrastructure and touching on demand side response and saying, this will never be a thing, this won't be a thing. And at this time I didn't work for Myenergi, and now to be sort of leading on one of the biggest domestic trials in the UK, like, it's quite a satisfying feeling, to be honest with you. And again, like, you know, I could natter your head off, and I think I have done for sort of the past 2 weeks. I could talk about this for hours. Been given the platform to sort of, you know, show what we consider a success in Myenergi, and so hopefully share a little bit of insight. Again, I'd like to keep you all teased on that front about, you know, what comes next. But yeah, no, it's been great. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, James, for taking the time. I think it was very exciting. What I would like to highlight is that obviously this is a community that we are trying to build. We are planning to organize monthly events focusing on real world projects like this one. As I mentioned in the beginning, we would like to bring a bit more pragmatic approach to the industry. So I encourage everybody to join the community, join future events, and obviously the Slack channel as well. You have the link in the chat. We will be sharing the report with the members in the Slack, as Greg mentioned, and also we will have a raw recording shared with all the members. We will edit that and have it posted publicly eventually as well. Thank you very much for everybody for joining, and let's join forces and shape the future of energy usage and distribution for a better future together.
Great. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.